I am as tapped in to mixed martial arts, I think, as anybody in Western New York. I know things before they happen. I hear things before they happen. I know rumblings before they're even rumblings. And I'm very curious at this point because when I hear things, when I hear rumblings before they're rumblings, when I know things before they happen or hear things before they happen, it's pretty common. But there has been one exception, and that is the heavyweight version of John Bones Jones, as well as the UFC's heavyweight division. Now, I will say this. John Jones has every right to be listed as either the best of all time or one of the best mixed martial artists of all time. Do I rank him as the greatest of all time? No, I do not. For those of you that have never tuned in the Thomas Take Sports podcast, I'll tell you right here, right now, in my humble opinion, the greatest of all time is from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, and his name is Georges St. Pierre. That's the best UFC fighter to ever put on a black leather 4-ounce glove with the 3 white letters U, F, and C on it. Georges St. Pierre. Now, John Jones is probably the greatest talent that I've ever seen in any combat sport, whether it's mixed martial arts, boxing, amateur wrestling, jiu-jitsu, you name it. And I've seen it all. He's been around for a very long time. He's been at the top for a very long time. He's been at the top. He's hit rock bottom in his personal life multiple times, but he's always found a way to get back up. And of course, I want to mention, before I dive any further into the subject matter, the Thomas Take Sports podcast is brought to you by 26shirts.com and is live every Wednesday night at 8 on the Buffalo Fanbase Podcast Network for all of your Buffalo sports needs. This episode is on the audio side of things as you're tuning in on any of the podcasting apps that you're tuning in on, whether it's Apple, whether it's Spotify, whether it's Google Podcasts, any audio platform that streams podcasts, the Thomas Take Sports podcast is available everywhere, which makes it very easy for you, the listener, to consume this podcast. And I greatly appreciate anybody that has ever hit download or that has ever hit the play button on this show that has been following along for the last 8 years. You guys, I love you guys. I've met some amazing people, and I want to mention that before I dive any further. So, of course, as I pick the ball back up, John Jones in the UFC heavyweight division. Right now, I have heard virtually nothing as to what's going on. Is John Jones going to be fighting Stipe Miocic anytime soon? I know that was the original plan. I know that fight was going to happen. John Jones tore, I believe, his labrum, and he had to have a replacement surgery, not just going under the knife, cleaning it up. It was a full-on replacement, which is massive. I mean, that's a massive, really rough rehab, really rough surgery, rough injury that you have to come back from. But I also know that I was not pumped about John Jones fighting Stipe Miocic. I didn't look at John Jones and Stipe and say, wow, I can't wait for this fight. I'm so pumped for this fight. This is the fight to make. This is the one. This is the guy. This is the opponent. I look at John Jones and Stipe as any other fight. I'm not as hyped about that fight because I think it's a pretty obvious one. I'm hyped about fights where I really couldn't pick who's going to win with full confidence. Those are the fights that I like. Those are the 50-50 fights, or the fights where you got a great champion that could lose his title. I don't see that when talking about Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic. With all due respect to the HW GOAT, the heavyweight GOAT that is, Stipe Miocic, I don't think he has a chance against Jon Jones. And that is very bold of me to say because every fighter has a chance. Every fighter has what's called a puncher's chance. But to me, Stipe doesn't. To me, Jon Jones is far superior an athlete, far superior a fighter. And yeah, Stipe did beat Francis Ngannou one time when no one thought he would. Francis did avenge his loss to Daniel Cormier not once but twice when no one thought he would. Stipe, as I mentioned, is the greatest heavyweight of all time, but Father Time is undefeated, and Stipe hasn't fought in what feels like 3 or 4 years. I might be right on that. I might be a little bit shy on that. But it's been a long-ass time since Stipe has stepped in the octagon. And it's been a long-ass time that Jon Jones has as well. But that talent level that Jon Jones has never seemed to shy away from him. Those improvisational skills that he has inside the octagon that make him such a mesmerizing fighter, that make his performances against guys like Rashad Evans and Lyoto Machida and Rampage, that era, and moving on to the gutsy, gritty performance against Alexander Gustafsson, the Cormier fights. That's what makes Jon Jones Jon Jones. And Stipe, I don't think he is that. Can the division's greatest beat arguably the greatest? That's the question with that fight, and I think that Jones is a solid favorite. Now, every fight's a different fight. I could be completely wrong, and that's what makes mixed martial arts so great. But I look at a matchup between Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall as one that is much more entertaining, much more tantalizing, because in that case, you look at the poster, you'd see Jon Jones, you'd see Tom Aspinall, both would be having belts wrapped around their shoulder in the photo. Aspinall, the interim heavyweight champion. Jones, the lineal heavyweight champion, a heavyweight unification bout. When has that not sold? Whether it was Lesnar and Carwin, or any heavyweight boxing bout, championship bout, pretty much of all time. When has that not sold? But you'd have a GOAT fighter in Jon Jones versus a young, uber-talented fighter in Tom Aspinall. You might be right on this if you were to say, or if I were to say, that Tom Aspinall is probably the most talented fighter in the UFC since Jon Jones. From a well-rounded standpoint, from a mixed martial arts, emphasis on the mixed martial arts, Tom Aspinall is a phenomenal fighter. He has all the tools. I look at him as a heavyweight type GSP, George St. Pierre. A heavyweight type Jon Jones. It's a great bout. It's a great fight. And yet, you have another guy that is making a case that I don't think anyone had ever anticipated, that I don't think anyone had ever even thought would come across their desk as a contender in the heavyweight division, in former UFC middleweight champion and current UFC-led heavyweight champion Alex Pereira. This guy has staked his own claim as one of the best fighters of all time, and he's done it in record time. 2-3 years ago, only hardcore fans knew him as a glory kickboxer. With all due respect to any athlete, any fighter, any competitor, any kickboxer that's competed inside glory, that's not looked at as the upper echelon of mixed martial arts like the UFC. It's a kickboxing organization. I've known many fighters that have fought in it within kickboxing, but even kickboxing, as much as I love it, I respect it, but grand scale, that's not looked at as, a highly regarded martial art as wrestling or jiu-jitsu. It's just not. And yet, this guy comes from glory. He does what he did there, comes into the UFC, beats Israel Adesanya with a record of like 8-0 or something like that. Was known to give Adesanya fits when Adesanya fought in kickboxing. And this guy has done everything in his power to provide great fights for the UFC. He has been a pure version of a company man, and he has excelled in every single given opportunity, whether it was short notice, whether it was with the right amount of notice. Alex Pereira is a great fighter, and I do think he could move up to heavyweight. I do think he could win at heavyweight. Could he beat John Jones? Could he beat Tom Aspinall? I don't know, but I'm willing to find out. And when you ask yourself that question as a combat sports fan or as an analyst or whatever it may be, and you say, I don't know, those are the fights that are worth making. Those are the fights that get the fans talking. Those are the fights that create buzz in the sport, which right now, the UFC desperately needs moments that are buzz-worthy moments. And Alex Pereira could provide that. Now, he could also stay at light heavyweight, try to outdo John Jones, and what John Jones did as the greatest light heavyweight of all time, easily. But Pereira could surpass that, potentially. If, in fact, statistically, he defends the title enough, if, in fact, he does it in emphatic fashion enough, the case can be made that he could become the greatest light heavyweight ever. And a guy that was a former middleweight champion. And a guy that could potentially end his career as the heavyweight champion. If Alex Pereira does that, then he is one of, if not the best of all time. Crazy time that we're living in right now, 2024. John Jones is the UFC heavyweight champion. He defeated Cyril Gane for the vacant title over a year ago. The belt was not stripped of him. They did make an interim belt. Tom Aspinall did beat Sergey Pavlovich to win it, which was a huge deal in the fashion that he did it in. He kind of took the aura away a little bit from Sergey Pavlovich. I believe that was the fighter that he did it against. If I'm wrong on that, I'll correct myself. But Aspinall, great fighter. Him fighting John Jones would be a great fight. But I do believe Jones will fight Stipe. Jones will beat Stipe. And maybe John Jones won't be retiring after all.